James Madison once said, "Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and those who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power in which knowledge provides." But that power, that knowledge, is slowly slipping through our fingers. The complex, confusing, often slow-moving process of government is being hidden behind a curtain of boredom and apathy. We have made government so dull, so inaccessible, that even the people it affects the most often tune it out, not because they don't care, but because no one has ever taught them how to care effectively. We have been given the right to participate in this massive democratic system, but no one has ever given us the toolkit on how to use it. But here's the problem. We cannot protect a system that we don't understand. Right now, millions of high school students graduate without ever learning how our democracy works, leaving them vulnerable to misinformation, manipulation, and the very extremist ideologies threatening our country today. Right now, I want to convince every single person in this room to go home and watch the news, read a current events article, and research who your representatives are. But first, let's define the term civic, of or relating to a citizen, city, citizenship, or community affairs. And civics, also known as civic education, which encompasses the study of our rights and responsibilities as citizens of a society. Often they focus on how we interact with and influence government in our daily civic lives. But while we all have civic duties, our schools are increasingly duty-free zones. Right now, civic education in America is facing a crisis, one that most people don't even know is happening. In fact, over the past 4 decades, civic education requirements in schools have been steadily declining. And it's right there in the data. According to the American Federation of Teachers, only 9 schools plus DC require a full year of civics graduates. 30 require just 1 semester, and 11 have no civics requirements at all. This means that in most schools, civics is a box to check, a chapter to skim through, not an actual skill to learn. So, what does this accomplish? It creates an entire generation of young people who can literally quote every single line of Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton, yet cannot tell me the difference between the House of Representatives and the Senate. In fact, according to the Harvard Gazette, over 40% of young people could not correctly identify all 3 branches of government. Meanwhile, this is the most connected generation ever. Gen Z spends more time online than any other previous cohort. But despite this access to information, according to Stanford News, over 70% of young people describe that they have encountered misinformation online and haven't been able to distinguish between that and credible sources. All while special interest groups, non-state actors, and super PACs prey on their every click. This leads to something called a civic literacy gap, meaning that there are millions of young people out there who are engaged in social issues but don't know enough to make an actual impact on society. So, why does this matter? When young people don't understand their power or how to effectively engage, they become vulnerable to misinformation and manipulation. This is a hole that most extremist ideologies often exploit, and this vulnerability is an existential threat to our democracy. Civic education does not just teach facts, it teaches habits, like lifelong voting, advocacy, and participation. Students who understand their power are more likely to register, show up, and engage beyond voting. In fact, according to a study by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, students who receive a comprehensive civic education are 33% more likely to advocate for civics in their adult lives, doing things like speaking with legislatures, voting, and volunteering. For this generation, that's critical. Gen Z protests more than any other generation. We are the most vocal on climate change, racial justice, and reproductive rights. Civic education allows us to turn that advocacy into action. I want to tell you a story. In 2014, Flint, Michigan faced a public health crisis. The residents noticed a foul smell, an odd color coming from their water. However, it was a grassroots civic organization that helped mobilize the community. Their actions led to broader policy changes, more funding for infrastructure, and started a broader conversation about climate change and government accountability. Flint is a perfect example of how civic knowledge and community engagement helps address systemic failures in society and often improves lives. Civics is not about ideology. It is not about uniformity of belief, but rather unity of process. When people understand how their power works, how to debate respectfully and build consensus, they are less likely to fall into dangerous, polarized thinking. Civic education allows people to communicate across differences, understand different perspectives, and ultimately identify solutions that work for everyone, not just the loudest voices. Every law passed, every budget approved, and every right expanded and restricted happened because someone was in the room to influence that decision. Representation is so uncertain. And when Gen Z isn't in those rooms, when our voices aren't heard, it's because no one ever gave us the key to get in. But the problem is, we've all seen what happens when people are locked out. According to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, over 70% of young people reported spotting misinformation online. Yet, only 40% of people felt confident in their ability to identify it. If we do not teach our young people how to spot misinformation and understand their rights, democracy will weaken and eventually crumble. This is because democracy relies upon an informed electorate to make decisions, regulate leaders, and protest against injustice. In fact, the very own framers of our U.S. Constitution put trust in the people to regulate leaders via elections. But when those leaders can prey on misinformation, the very foundation of democracy is at risk. Thankfully, there's a solution. We just need to act fast. Picture a world where every high schooler graduates knowing how to write policy proposals, engage elected leaders, register voters, and verify the facts in the news. Where schools offer courses on spotting misinformation, understanding how political interest groups impact policy, and even basic things, like what our civic duties are. Schools can partner with organizations like the Bill of Rights Institute and the Center for Civic Education to amplify student voices beyond the classroom. Parents can rank schools on civic education just like they do in STEM or sports. I can tell you from my own personal experience that participating in activities like speech and debate and mock trial have given me a broader understanding of both our democracy and the world. I want every single person to be able to understand that impact. Imagine what it could be. A student starts by advocating for a stop sign on their street. That success leads to them advocating for climate legislation, and later they run for city council, the school board, or maybe one day, even Congress. From classrooms all the way to Capitol Hill, the path exists. We just need to create it. So, here's the challenge. For every educator, every policymaker, and every voter in this room, treat civic education as seriously as you treat math or STEM. Demand it, fund it, and make it the norm, not the exception. Because our democracy is not self-sustaining. It does not upkeep itself. We upkeep it. And if we want Gen Z and every other generation afterwards to keep the democracy that we have worked so hard to build and maintain, we have to give them a roadmap. Because civic education is not just something that we inherit. It is something that we choose to preserve. Let's start in the classroom. Thank you.